Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and we're going to talk about why you should consider returning to problematic dungeon masters. Dicey subject. So first of all, let me explain this. If the problem you had with a dungeon master is as a safety concern, be very careful, right? I'm talking about design differences and like belief differences that are not core to your identity but are important to you as a dungeon master, as a dungeon player, or as a dungeon designer, right? Basically arguments that are purely Dungeons and Dragons and aren't involved in your safety. I have a perfect example of this. So my last campaign ended after 10 months when my friendship with the person ended. I would say probably 5 or 6 years ago, I had another major, falling out with somebody over a Dungeons and Dragons disagreement, and our friendship ended over the disagreement, right? And so, I don't play at this Dungeon Master's table anymore because I consider him a problematic DM. It has nothing to do with safety. It's that our opinions on Dungeons and Dragons are so drastically different, and that there was essentially a betrayal. That I felt there was a betrayal on the part of my friend, and we've been alienated for 6 years, 5 or 6 years, right? So, I'm going to own some of this. I do not live in the gray. I live very much in the black and white, right and wrong. Like, that's the world I live in, and it causes me to be a difficult person to be friends with, and a significant number. I would say like 20% of my friendships end in tears and flames. No two ways about it, right? And the only true friends I really still have left are people who have some tolerance for my nonsense, right? It's just, and I will say this, I think the reason why some people remain friends with me is, I would say 10% of what I do and believe is nonsense, and 10% is epic, right? And I just believe, like, if you live life robustly, you're going to have some awesome and you're going to have some suck, right? And being friends with Scott Garibay, there's some suck in the mix. It really is. It's not great, right? But there's some epic moments too, right? I think that's what. And honestly, even as many friends as I've lost, I do not struggle to make new friends, and I still have. It amazes me how many friends remain friends with me, even though it is difficult to remain friends with me. All right, so I definitely have this, and I also want to say I'm giving advice that I'm not following. I am trying to reconcile with the friend that our 10-month campaign broke up. Check in with me at some point. I'll tell you how it's going. But that other one, that 5-6 year break, that I like the words that person said to me that I considered a betrayal, like echo in my head, and I can hear them and feel them today, as though not even 5 minutes have passed, right? And so I just can't bring myself to reconcile with them. So I'm giving advice that I'm not 100% following myself. So I'm going to admit that. I'm going to be open about it, right? But I really think you should consider returning to problematic DMs. Now, why are we talking about this? Well, we are talking about this based on the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I just watched this film. Spoilers for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I think this came out in 2020. And I think it won an Oscar, like kind of maybe like a low-end Oscar, but it won an Oscar. And this is a Quentin Tarantino film. So I have a history with Quentin Tarantino. I really loved Kill Bill. I'm a huge Uma Thurman fan. I also really liked Pulp Fiction. I think they're just tremendous films, and I think they're every DM content. Like, you watch these movies and you're like, this is how a story is made. This is how an action story is told. This is how non-linear storytelling works, right? Like, you can't argue with the amount of success those films have had, right? If you review Pulp Fiction and Kill Bill and you say they suck, those pieces of art review you. It's not the other way around. Like, you suck, right? Like, it's just the way it is, right? And I do feel there are pieces of art that are not, that cannot be objectively reviewed. Like, you can't be like, oh, it's David, the statue of David, it just sucks. No, it doesn't. You suck at reviewing art. Like, it's not. There are pieces of art that triumph so hard that, like, you can't review them. They review you, right? Like, and so I'm a firm believer in that, right? And I think Pulp Fiction and Kill Bill, volumes 1 and 2 are just inarguably good art, right? Like, So, with that said, let's fast forward to Hateful Eight, right? So at this point, Quentin Tarantino's doing extremely well. He's got multiple Oscars and and I think he reached the point that Stephen King reached in his career where his editors were no longer editing him, right? He was not taking notes from the studio, in my opinion, at the correct level. And Hateful Eight, I love Westerns. And I watched Hateful Eight, and it had a horrific scene in it that involved Samuel Jackson. And it was so bad. The scene, it was such a Hollywood overshoot. Overshoot is a big thing with Hollywood. They're like, whatever cool epic thing you're going to do, times it by 3. And sometimes you're like, no, man, you need a corporate suit there telling you, no, this does not belong in this film. This is anachronistic. This action is so bad, it makes people question the entire career choices of people, including you as a director. And I have to say, after I watched Hateful Eight, there was a scene that was so bad in it that I no longer watched Quentin Tarantino movies, and I stopped watching Samuel Jackson movies. So I was like, their choices career-wise, I don't sign off on any of this. I just think it's not. I'm not comfortable with any of this, right? And I'm like, these are people who are making art that I am not comfortable with in any way, right? So I swore off Quentin Tarantino, and I'm like, I'm done. I'm not watching another Tarantino movie. And that was hard for me because I really like action films, and he's a pretty darn good action director, right? But like, I'm still an evangelical Christian, and if you like way out, like, if I feel like you're making lawful evil choices on the reg, I can't keep signing off on and giving you money for tickets so you can keep creating art. And I thought there were just too many lawful evil choices in the making of Hateful Eight, right? So with that said, right, I just swore off, and so I never watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I get drugged to art pieces. I get drugged to things in my life. My brother started talking about this movie, and he wanted to talk about Bruce Lee, right? So I talked with him about Bruce Lee. I talked with Tarantino about, Tarantino's, and I hadn't seen the film, right? But my brother would not shut up about this because he was fascinated by the Bruce Lee scene, right? So then, a good friend of mine, I have a really epic family. My daughter dog watches, and she had done such a good job dog watching for months and months for this person that they said, hey, I'm taking your entire family out. So my entire family, which is 6 people, got invited to an Iron Hill Brewery dinner. It probably cost $200 to $400 for everybody involved, and because we are a big family, right? And this guy told me, you got to watch Once Upon a Time, and I'm like, I haven't seen it. And he's like, but you said you're an action fan, and I'm like, yeah, I am. So he's like, you got to borrow, I'm going to give you my Blu-ray, and you got to watch this thing. So I'm like, okay, so I watched it. I was 100% wrong. All the overshoot, all the unedited, all the restraint that was missing in Hateful Eight is there in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It is by far Quentin Tarantino's best film, and it really brings Truman Capote's milieu to the big screen. So I returned to a problematic filmmaker and was rewarded for it, right? And so I think if you're like me, you care a lot about Dungeons & Dragons, and you might have written some Dungeon Masters off your list, and I'm here to tell you, I'd love to say that you can do that, but I think if a year or two passes and you have any sense that person has changed, or people are telling you that person has changed and they fixed problems in their past, you may want to consider returning to problematic Dungeon Masters, getting a seat at their table, and allowing their new brilliance and their new fundamental changes as a person to benefit you. That's my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about returning to problematic DMs when it's not a safety concern? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.